Welcome to the Rational Egoist. I'm your host, Michael Liebowitz. With us today is the senior editor at the American Institute for Economic Research. He also writes his own Substack called The Take. Jon Miltimore, welcome back to the show.
Hey, good to see you again, Michael. How you been?
I'm doing well. You're very much involved in what might broadly be called the liberty movement, whether it was in your own Substack, in your former position at Fee, and now with the AIER. What initially attracted you to the freedom movement or the ideas of capitalism and liberty?
It's interesting you say that because I've never really thought of myself as being, at the center of the liberty movement. I've always looked at myself as kind of an outsider of the liberty movement, and I really still do. Although I do, I acknowledge that I get to meet a lot of people who have been a part of it for a very long time, and people I look at as very impressive and brilliant people. To be honest, I arrived here kind of by accident. I did some free market work years ago for a little think tank because it was a place that gave me a chance to write about ideas in politics and policy and some things. And then I was out of it for probably a good 10 years or so. And I did some more traditional journalism, worked at newspapers and magazines and so forth, but was brought back because there was opportunity, really, because I would always stayed passionate about the ideas, and it seemed like a place where you could really be, writing about ideas, talking about ideas, and not just economics, but history, philosophy, and all those things. And I've just got once you're there, you start producing content and meeting people, and I guess my footprint has grown a little bit bigger. I've had the opportunity to work for more organizations, meet more people, and build your own network. And I imagine, I'm not the only person that kind of stumbled into it by accident. It wasn't, I didn't go out, saying like, boy, I really want to work in the liberty movement. It was one like there was opportunities there, and I just find myself oftentimes in a like-minded community. Now, I hesitate to say that even as I say it because people think like, oh, all you libertarians, all you free market people, you all think alike, and that's not true at all. Like,
No.
and you get us in rooms together, and there's a lot of disagreement and often a lot of passionate disagreement, and it's just one of those things. Like there, on some general things that everyone agrees, but there is a lot of debate that happens, in these communities.
Well, sure. I mean, you just take an issue like patents and copyrights, and you throw that topic into a group of libertarians.
Intellectual property, right? Like you wouldn't believe how much people can get, discussing intellectual property ideas in the libertarian community. And I go back and forth, like I have, I'm a little torn on this myself. Because I think where I think we have to acknowledge there's trade-offs, right? There's some things about intellectual property that are good. And this is something my friends that hate intellectual property rights, I think they need to acknowledge. Without intellectual property rights, I don't think you have the same incentives to create in whether it's inventions and things or music and film. When people can make millions and millions of dollars by writing a movie script, I mean that's a really good incentive to create. And I think absent that, the some of the incentives aren't there. But that's a whole different discussion.
Yeah, and there's a lot of issues like that, right? So it's definitely true that libertarian-minded people don't all think alike. And sort of along those lines, what thinkers have had the biggest impact on you?
You know,
Uh,
I I get this question a lot, and it depends if you're asking libertarian thinkers. I go back to different ones. There's and I'll start with a couple that wouldn't have described themselves as libertarians. Dietrich Bonhoeffer's one. I bring him up because there's a new movie coming out on Bonhoeffer that I actually wrote about it on my Substack today. And the trailer for this movie is just incredible. Like the trailer I haven't been this moved by a movie trailer in a very long time, but partly because the music they have Sound of Silence by Disturbed playing in the background,
oh, that's
and
wicked.
it is so powerful and so moving. And I'm watching this, and Bonhoeffer is one of those people I've been kind of dabbling in for years. And I've always said, why don't we have a good movie? I think there was a TV movie years ago, but it didn't really do it. And I think we're going to have one. And so there's one, and Solzhenitsyn's another. Like these are people who I don't think they weren't people that shaped my mind about tax policies, but they shaped my mind on things like courage, right? Like these were some of the bravest people I've ever seen. And they did things, and you find yourself wondering, like could I do what they did? And so those are people. If you're talking economists, Thomas Sowell was one of those guys that I say was just I read in maybe in college, basic economics, and I never realized like I could that how interesting economics could be. And I think I like Sowell because he's really good at putting history in, just reflecting on economic history and finding not just you know, we're not talking micro and macro stuff. We're seeing how economics and incentives work. And it was really a guy that was for me kind of got me interested in other people. Then you just start reading, Hayek and Mises and I've dabbled in Murray Rothbard, who's fun to read, and just all these other people that you read along the way. And I'm not somebody who goes and like I'm going to read all the works of somebody. I kind of pick up different readers or different writers and read selected, maybe some of their shorter stuff, maybe certain chapters of their works. And there's this, you know, I get what do you call it? Kind of an adage. Are you a hedgehog or are you a fox? Right? The hedgehog gets into one thing a lot, and the hedgehog just devours this one thing. The fox is the opposite. It goes and noses around, and I'm very much a fox in my reading. I'm always reading 3 4 books at once, and different topics
Oh,
and stuff like that. That's just how I learn. I think maybe it's an attention span issue. I like to read about a lot of different things at once, and not get bogged down into one specific author or one specific area too much.
wow, I've never heard that before, but I'm definitely a hedgehog. Just the idea of reading multiple books at once, that would drive me nuts, like completely crazy. Totally. And I got to tell you, my age is showing. When you said you read Soul, Basic Economics back in college, I'm thinking, wow, that we're roughly the same age. I'm thinking, oh, that's a long time ago. And then I realized I read Basic Economics in 2001. So you're talking 23 years ago, Mike.
I probably read it in the same year. That's right. And I was still in college in '01. It was probably 2001 or 2002. And it was one of those books that was a gift. And, it's one of those things I think about. Some of the most influential books I've ever read were gifts. And now it's a habit I try to cultivate in my life. If I like someone, I'm probably going to give you a book to read and say, because to me, it's you're sharing something. I don't want to say intimate with someone, but something books have a way to shape our ideas and our thoughts and all these things in ways very few things can. And if you see a book that can resonate with someone, like just go get them a book. If you liked it, and maybe they read it and maybe they don't. Maybe they'll like it as much as you do, maybe they don't. But I'd much rather do that than a Starbucks gift card or, like something. To me, like sharing books with people is one of the fun things to do in life.
I agree. From a perspective of wanting to persuade people, I find that books are far more effective than any amount of conversation, because when you have a conversation, it tends to become a lot of times anyway, a competition where people will dig in. But when it's reading a book, and I know this from myself, it's just you're engaged with an author that's not there. It's just words on paper that are making a case, and it makes it far easier to really consider what you're reading, as opposed to trying to think of how can I respond to win this argument. So I agree with that wholeheartedly. Now, you used to work for the Foundation for Economic Education, and that organization played such a pivotal role in my development, through their magazine Ideas on Liberty, through introducing me to laissez-faire books. And what a great organization. It's been around for a very long time, founded by Leonard Reed. But now you're at the American Institute for Economic Research, and I only heard of them maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. And I've seen some interesting stuff come out of there, some interesting articles, but I really don't know much about the organization. So what exactly does the organization do? Like, what is its mission?
It's interesting. AIER is very similar to fee in a lot of ways. I tell people this, they're like, "Oh, you got a new job? Tell me about it. Like, what are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm doing the same stuff." Really, for me, my role hasn't changed a whole lot. The mission of fee and the mission of AIER is very similar. I think where it's different, I think fee as an organization is very targeted toward younger people. Okay, and um, and that was always kind of a bit of a challenge for me. I'm 45 years old, and when we're trying to reach Gen Z, I'm aware I feel like a boomer sometimes. I feel like an old guy trying to reach young people, and I think reaching young people is very important, but it's a little more challenging, in some ways. AIER isn't really focused just on young people, or do we want to reach young people? Absolutely. But what's interesting is AIER is, as to my knowledge, the only free market organization, at least in the United States, maybe in the world. I'm not 100% sure. That is older than fee. AIER was founded in
Really?
1933 by E.C. Harwood, who was a colonel in the army. I think he was a colonel, and had was loved economics and ideas and liberty, and founded an organization around that. And been around a long time. They got a beautiful mansion in Massachusetts, in Great Barrington. And if people know that name, if people know anything about AIER, they usually say, "Oh, the Great Barrington Declaration," because that's where that took place at the campus of AIER, when you had these scientists during COVID that came out and signed this proclamation saying, "We're doing this wrong." Stripping Americans of civil liberties, or, people all over the world, stripping them of civil liberties, locking them up. This is not the way to fight this virus. And you had, Jay Bhattacharya, Martin Kaldorf, Jeffrey Tucker, and there were a handful of people that came there and had that proclamation that was signed by tens of thousands of scientists. And became kind of a focal point because Francis Collins and Anthony Fauci soon got wind of this. They did not like it, right? And they took steps to try to discredit the organization. They set journalists out to attack, not both the organization and the message, that saying there's a better way to fight this virus. And to me, that what a feather in the cap of AIER to have people like Fauci saying no. And what was great is that they went and did a FOIA request, got the emails where Fauci and Collins were talking about them and saying something needs to be done here. And they took great steps, as you know, to try to shut up, by attacking free speech, of the organization, people that were speaking out, trying to say like this is not based on good science. And all of that led to the censorship we saw in 2021, 2022, where if you were trying to say, hey, this virus came, out of China, and there's this in Wuhan, this institute over there that's experimenting on coronaviruses, that's pretty strange. If you tried to draw a connection there, you would get kicked off of Facebook or Twitter, at least if the post started to get attention, right? And you know, finally, it became enough people started to say, well, you know, what's going on here? Where they got pushback on that front. And today, most government agencies believe that virus came out of the Wuhan lab, right? But you couldn't say that in 2021. And all of that kind of goes back to I think important work AIER and FEE that these organizations were doing at that time. And to be part of it at FEE and not to be part at AIER, to me it's very much a badge of honor to be with those organizations who did some very instrumental work during that really crazy time.
In reading up on AIER, I came across something I found interesting. It said that the main target audience are people that are right of center or slightly left of center. Why is that the main target?
That's a good question. I think, part of it is we're trying to appeal to the everyman, really. Like we have a lot of really smart economists that write for us, academics that write for us, but writing for the academic audience isn't what we're trying to do. We're just trying to reach everyday people who are deeply interested in ideas and in economics. And I think, from a tone perspective, um, I, I think one of our core, we're not trying to sound like anarchists here. We're trying to just get really good important ideas to people who are learning and trying to understand better how things work. And whether you're slightly right of center or left of center, I think you can look at this work and find things in there that are going to be teachable moments, and that are going to deepen your own understanding on things, whether it's economics or philosophy, or we go into things, we do foreign policy from time to time, and I think I think it's something we try to do, like organization. I think there's an acceptance, like humans are human, right? Humans might be fighting wars, but we're trying to be a little bit realist as well, and to approach this like who is this serving? Who is being served by never-ending conflicts and so forth? So I guess I would say that like it is something I really truly believe. And there's some organizations that do this well. Um, Libertarianism should not be a right or left idea. I think there is this thing today, this idea where people associate libertarianism with the right. And there was somebody that did this on Twitter. I think it was Catherine Maggie Ward, who they accused her of being a right winger because she was one of the people the New York Times went after. Like the Times got her post debate opinion, and so she was one of the right wing voices. And she's like, if you go to my Twitter bio, I support legalizing heroin. Like I like what makes you think, what is it about my views that are right wing? And I think she did a very good job of pushing back. Like libertarianism is not a right wing or a left wing idea. It's founded it's an idea rooted in good principles that should and do appeal to people on both the left wing and the right
For sure. Speaking of the debate, we spoke before we came in the air, and I told you I supported George W. Bush in 2000. I supported McCain against Obama, always as the sort of lesser of two evils. They weren't exact with me, but they were closer, at least in their rhetoric, in terms of upholding the Constitution, originalist judges, pro-capitalism. And I mean, I remember in 2012, I thought to myself, I don't think I can support Romney. He came up with the individual mandate there, or he implemented anyways in Massachusetts. I just didn't trust him. And then I heard Obama's State of the Union, and I remember thinking, yeah, I have to support Romney here. There's no way I can't oppose this guy. This is just so beyond the pale in terms of what he thinks the role of government is. And then in 2016, I initially supported Rand Paul. And once it became obvious that he wasn't feasible, I went with Ted Cruz because Ted Cruz I knew had studied Mises. He was a constitutionalist. So I said, okay, I can go for this guy. There was no way I could support Trump. First of all, his policies in terms of protectionism, I thought were awful. And then his rhetoric, the way he talked about people, I thought were very bad. And he just lies so brazenly. And I know, and people always say to me, well, everybody lies, all the politicians lie, which I think is largely true. But it's like saying, well, everybody breaks the law. That guy's a murderer. This guy ran a red light, and equating them. And it's just the two don't equate. And the two things that happened recently, if only these two things happened, I wouldn't have been able to support Trump. First, he took Laura Loomer to the 9/11 ceremony. You're talking about a right wing nut who is a 9/11 truther, and you take her to the ceremony for 9/11. It was just so disrespectful. And none of the conservatives who are so patriotic and so, stand up for the flag seem to have an issue with it. And then recently they were talking about the rhetoric coming out of the left about calling Trump Hitler and a fascist. And I think that stuff's ridiculous. I don't think he's anywhere approaching Adolf Hitler or even being a fascist. I think he's dangerous and I think his policies are bad, but that doesn't make him a fascist. But JD Vance is saying that that type of rhetoric is leading to these, the two assassination attempts on Trump. But meanwhile, Trump has given a speech saying that Biden is a communist, or not Biden, Harris is a communist. And if she's elected, the country's over. The blatant hypocrisy and dishonesty there is just too much for me. But to be fair, I've long distrusted the mainstream media ever since I've really been following politics. Not that I thought that they would outright lie or fabricate stories, but just that their bias determines what they cover in the way that they cover it. So this is just a long-winded way for me to say to you that so many people nowadays seem to be completely unconcerned with truth. They pick a media organization that tells them what they want to hear, and that's where they go get their information, and they live in these silos, and there's nothing that seems to break them out. And I just wonder, from your point of view and the point of view of your organization, does that make it easier or more difficult for you to spread your message and what you're trying to say?
Yeah, I can't really speak for the organization on any of these things, but speaking as an individual, I understand what you're saying, and I'll go back to somebody I mentioned earlier, Solzhenitsyn, and he said our one duty, and I'm paraphrasing him here, but is to not participate in the lie, right? And he saw that as very important, and and you're gonna have lies all around you, and you're gonna be kind of pressured to participate. He said, don't do it, don't do it. And to me, this is when you have all of the lies on the left and all of the lies on the right, everyone wants to say what side are you on, and I really feel like I'm at peace in saying I'm not on either of those sides, and you shouldn't be either. And I get that ultimately we all have to cast a ballot for someone, and that's really what's at stake here. We have this super powerful government now that's going to be making all these decisions it was not supposed to be making, and it's going to be involved in our life to a degree that it was never supposed to be involved. And that's why you have this massive pressure. And I've made this point to the people, both sides are terrified of the other. And there's good reason for them to be terrified of it. Like, this is not irrational fear. Like, they're right to be afraid of Trump because if you look at what they've done, the methods they've used against Trump, all the lawfare, everything they've done, if you look at people within the U.S. intel organizations that have been using these methods to give him another chance in power is very dangerous. There's great reason for them to be afraid of giving this guy power again. And if you're on the right, yeah, you have a lot of reason to be terrified of the left too. Like there's all kinds of reasons you can see when we hear look what's happening around um, other countries in France, where you have the Telegram, CEO who's just being arrested because his app is a danger to them. In Brazil, they're just getting rid of X, formerly Twitter. Over here, you have presidential candidates that are saying like, oh, that whole First Amendment thing, like, sorry, you know, that's not, don't really think that protects you from hate speech or misinformation or things like that. Like you have reason to be afraid of these people on both sides. Um, so I think that's why things are becoming so intense and so stressful. I'll go back to something you said, Laura Loomer. I just tweeted this. I don't know if you saw this. I know we
I
follow each other
didn't.
on Twitter, but I made this point, and it might have been my biggest, tweet of the month. Like Twitter kind of shows you which one. And I said the biggest reason I can't vote for Trump is because he pals around with people like Laura Loomer, and she's a fraud, she's a liar, she's unstable, she's all these things. And I think when the president of the United States is palling around with these people, elevating them, snuggling up with them, like literally, like he had his arm around her, like in a very, intimate way. This is crazy to me because I remember like this, Laura Loomer's one of those people, she shares stuff all the time that I think she knows isn't true. And I've been on Twitter, I've said, this isn't true. And she doesn't care. And there's, let's face it, a lot of people on the right and the left are the same way. You can catch them saying something that's false, and they're not even going to go bother with a correction unless they get enough people that say, okay, this is a problem for you, right? Enough pressure comes down, you're going to delete the tweet and say, boy, I got that wrong, or I shouldn't have said that. But like I didn't realize he took Loomer to that 9/11 event. It is very poor taste. And people are like, well, what does that matter? Like the people, hanging around who cares who a president hangs around with? I care about policy. This is what one person said to me. I'm like, sorry, that the people that you associate with matters a lot, especially presidents. They're going to be carrying out your agenda. they're gonna, in a lot of ways represent you. And there's a lot of people in that that Trump sphere that I think are bad people. And so that is one of the things, and I say all that, and when people ask me, when I have to give an honest answer, would I who am I more afraid of? Like, the truth is, I'm more afraid of a Harris presidency than a Trump presidency. But and people, I can talk to people and they'll say the opposite, and I respect that too. And like you and I have talked a little bit, Michael, we've talked about this. You know, as long as somebody says, "Gosh, I don't know who to vote for. I'm voting for the lesser of, what I think is the lesser evil." I get that. Like, right? What I don't like is when people put these people on pedestals and
Right.
these cults of personality develop around them. That scares me. And we've seen that done with both the left and the right more and more in the last few years here, and it troubles me.
The thing with a Laura Loomer and Trump hanging around with her, it's not only symbolism to me, and it's not only poor taste. It's both, of course, but it's also what seems obvious to me, the reason he elevates her, because all she does on social media is kiss his ass. She talks about how perfect he is. He's the best president ever. He's so wonderful. He's great. And it's all the evidence indicates that that's what Trump wants. And if it's so easy to curry favor with him just by telling him what he wants to hear, then he's a sitting duck for politicians, foreign leaders, businessmen, whomever, or whoever that wants to influence him. That's dangerous. That's more than just, well, he hangs around with this whack job. And you said something earlier. You mentioned Catherine Mango Ward. This is funny because I'm like you. I'm rooting for Harris, but mostly out of a sports team like thing. I don't really care who wins, but I just don't like Trump. So it's like, I'm watching a prize fight. I'd rather see her win the prize fight. I think both of them are bad for the country. But I tend to criticize Trump more on social media, largely because the people I follow and that follow me are Trump supporters. So I get their comments coming through my feed. I don't get a bunch of left-wing comments. So what I'm responding to are what I see. And people say to me, "You have Trump derangement syndrome. You're obviously a leftist." And recently, I posted an interview I did with Catherine Mango Ward. It was about an article she wrote for Reason, debunking the myths about Kamala Harris, where she explained that she's not the figure that they're presenting to you today. Very highly critical. So I posted that, and almost immediately I had Jeffrey Shaler, the libertarian psychiatrist. He comes on, Michael. How could you do this? How could you go after Kamala Harris? Don't you know what a horrible person Trump is and what a threat he is? And I'm just like, my God. Like, if even like I've looked up to Jeffrey Shaler for decades. I read his book while I was in prison. I've cited it. I've interviewed him twice on the show. I think he's a really nice guy. But when you criticize either side and the other side automatically pigeonholes you as sort of like a shill for the other side, that's just dangerous to me. That's a very bad way to do analysis, is to assume because somebody criticizes one guy, he must love the other. If I'm criticizing Hitler, it doesn't mean I'm a big fan of Stalin because they happen to go to war with each other. You know what I mean?
You know,
So
my, Michael
go, go.
Malice had a great point on that the other day. He said, uh, the average human being filters everything through an us them, worldview, right? And I push back a little bit. I think this gets worse during moral panics, during hyper partisan eras like we're living. But he might be right. The average person, I think, does. Like, you have us, and then you have them, and for a lot of these people, they can't. What you're saying as far as like, um, I can criticize this one, but I can criticize them too. Like that, they don't see it that way. No, you're on our team or you're against us. And when it became that way, I don't know, but that is the world we live in. Think about journalists today. This is why, how many journalists, how many reporters do you know that you can't tell what side they're on? Like, we know all of them, right? And that wasn't always the case. Like, there was supposed to be like a certain objectivity in journalism that, especially mainstream journalists, like when you're thinking like CBS, CNN, all these places, like you weren't supposed to really know what side they were on. And That pretense is gone. We know everyone. Like we know what side people are on, and that's not healthy. But there is this massive pressure to kind of take a side, and it's sort of to go back one more point to Loomer. I think you're right. Like so she has certain qualities that Trump admires, and he did something. This is back in probably 2017, and it involved. Remember Omarosa, who was in
Yeah,
his yeah.
yeah,
So
from The Apprentice.
yeah,
He
from The
made it part of
Apprentice.
his administration. Yeah.
He was announcing he was firing her. And he said, I always knew she was not that talented, but I kept her around because she was vicious. And he tweeted this. And I'm like, well, and I'm like, this is why Trump will never be a good leader. And I said it. And I said, because if the quality of viciousness is a virtuous trait for you, and that's a redeeming trait that kind of over. I said that's not good leadership, and I just got poured on by all these mega people who just came like, oh, and one of them even said like you're apt because she retweeted me and had like 500,000 followers. And there was something about that, like, and I just turned my phone off. I was taking my kid to see a movie, like we were going to see Solo or some Disney movie, Star Wars, and but I had it just blown up by people that were that angry by pointing out something that was to me objectively true. If you're keeping someone around because she's just vicious, like that's a bad. But I think there's something similar, like with a Loomer, because people are terrified of her. If you look, like people that worked with her, like they will not say a word about her because they're terrified that she's going to like screenshot them and blow them up and on Twitter and go nuclear, right? And there in today's age of super politics, there is value in that. But those aren't the people I want to, on my campaign. Those aren't the people that I'm going to surround myself with. But if you look, that's kind of how that's certainly how the Trump world is, and I think it's kind of how the left world has been for quite a while. I'm very similar, right? Like if you were useful to the team and were a team player, like that was really all that mattered. But I feel like old fashioned saying things like integrity and things like those things should matter in politics. I think you get laughed out of a room for saying things like that today.
Yeah, it doesn't matter to anybody. I think when I agree. The left has done that. I remember them saying, Paul Ryan, I think it was, he's pushing Grandpa off the cliff, and everything was you're a racist if you oppose this policy or that policy. What I
Mitt
think
Romney, he
Trump,
was he was going to put you all back in
yeah,
chains.
he's
You
gonna put
remember
you. Yeah,
that?
that
Like
yeah,
Mitt
that was
Romney.
insane. Yeah,
Yeah.
that it was nuts, and it was so uncalled for and so unfair. I think what Trump has done, to me, the way that I describe it is he's a normal politician, but a caricature of one. Like everything is exaggerated that we've seen for, my whole life anyway. I don't know what it was like before then, but with the lying, the demagoguery, pandering, Trump just takes that and blows it up to a degree that I've never seen. And I don't even care that he does that. What I care about is the following that he has. I care that people say, no, don't believe what you're seeing, don't believe what you're hearing. There's this truth that I don't know where it is, or how they have access to, like it's a platonic form somewhere that they're grasping, and they tell me, oh, you're just listening to the media. No, I heard him say it. I'm not listening to the media. I don't care what the media says. I know that when he was running for president, he first said Ted Cruz is okay to run for president. And then when Ted Cruz was started to catch up to him, he said, no, this guy's not legitimate to run for president. He's not an American citizen. I knew that. He claimed he saw thousands of Arabs celebrating on 9/11. That wasn't true. He said it, he saw it. The media didn't tell me he said it, but yet the people believe it and they defend it. So, with all of that, with all we've talked about, what do you think the actual prospects are for ever achieving even anything remotely resembling a libertarian society, the type of society that I think you and I would like to see, even if we disagree on some issues, just a largely free society where, as Leonard Reed said, you can do anything that's peaceful. As long as you're not violating the other people's rights, you can do it.
I don't think we're going to see that in the United States of America in its current form. Like, I think, this is something I've thought quite a bit about. Um, I do think we're kind of in this empire period in when the historians write this, they'll say like the American Empire, when did it start? When did it, end? I think we're in this period where um, things are starting to come up a bad thing. I think if there could be opportunity if Americans embraced it and understood it, where we could kind of go back to something that was a little bit more like the original conception of America, where you had these original states, these independent states, excuse me, and they were largely independent to decide to to have their own cultures, their own laws. They're bound by the Constitution, of course, um, but something I've said to other people. Look at what happened to the Soviet Union, right? Like nobody really saw the collapse of the Soviet Union coming. If you go read literature in the 70s and the 80s, this was not something people were talking about.
Yeah.
Nobody, I think they would have looked at as a kook for talking about the collapse of the Soviet Union. But that nevertheless happened, and it was a pretty peaceful thing, right? This transition was, I mean, in history, we kind of look over it, like it just kind of collapsed, and it was allowed to happen. And I wonder, what we see is when things get too big, that's what happens. Like empires kind of fracture. I think if Americans were smart, we would recognize that trying to keep this big, giant, continent, if you look at what we are, together through force, that would be a really bad idea. But if we have different people that want to go their own ways, that could be a good thing. And what would be the catalyst for that? We have no idea. Maybe it would be simple, like something as simple as let's say, let's say Trump did win in 2024, and Californians are like, to hell with this. We're gonna in Oregon and Washington in California said we're gonna have our own. That one catalyst that would kind of this is a long way for me saying I think us trying to keep America together as one country, if we, it's coming apart now. We try to hold it together through force and deception, all these things. I think Americans will be worse for it. There's a book, up in my bedroom that's on this. I'm blanking on the name. It's one of the 7 books I'm reading right now, and it's one I put away for a while. Um, Break It Up is what it's called, and it's written by not a right winger but a left winger and a professor, and he's tracing the whole history of this idea of why America would they wanted it to be one. And there's a lot of people that didn't at first, but eventually it got to be. But the whole thesis of the book is that no, we should let it go. And that is something that is going to be playing out or potentially playing out in the coming decades. That's not something, I think that's around the corner. But I stress to people when this starts to happen, we shouldn't look to Washington to try to keep this together through all these things. Like when you're starting to say like, oh, we can't have free speech because it hurts democracy. And what do you mean by democracy? They mean either our party or the United States, right? But that's not the end of democracy is not the end. Democracy is good because it's better than the alternatives for preserving liberty when it's constrained by a good constitution, right? But if we're talking about no, we got to suppress free speech because we got to save democracy. Well, you're already throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And so these are things, it's kind of things I don't write about this much. I don't talk about it much. I think about it a lot. And you hear these phrases like national divorce, and you got people like Sarah Silverman throwing that idea out there, like, and she's just wondering, like, maybe this is the best thing. Like maybe if we go our separate ways. Like again, I think it absolutely is if the alternative is trying to keep this together through more and more force. Like that's, we are by definition today an empire. And empires throughout history, that's kind of how they maintain the empire because they keep ratcheting up the force. But that was never, America was not supposed to be an empire, right? It was a bunch of little republics that were kind of, held together. Um, and the problem was it was born with the sin of slavery and these contradictions and the values. The values were good the whole time, but there was these contradictions, at the founding, and that we had to have a big civil war to fix those. And today Marxists are very good at still exploiting the sins of the past, right? And reminding us like, oh, we're not equal, in these things. But I would say, if America was a stock, I'm bearish. I'm not a bull because I think America's in a pretty bad place. And what happens next, I think is anyone's guess. There's going to be a big event, whether it's a year from now or 5 years from now, 10 or 20. Maybe it's another world war. Maybe it's some sort of revolution, and it's going to kind of determine where we go from here. But I just hope that we do have the right principles and people that have the right principles, that recognize that peace is important, that voluntary action is important, and if we're trying to force people into getting on our bandwagon, it's not the right way to do things.
All right, John. Thank you so much for being here today. Where can people find you?
Like we talked about AIER, and really easy to find us there. It's aier.org, and you can find all my content, like you said, Michael, at The Take by Jon Miltimore on Substack.
We can also find some archived articles from you at FEE, the Foundation for Economic Education, if we're looking for them.
All kinds of content at fee as well, you bet.
All right. Thanks a lot, John.
Hey, have a good one, Michael. Appreciate it.
You too. For now, this is the Rational Egoist signing out. Till next time.